Dan, welcome to the show. I really appreciate you doing this for me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. There's a lot that I want to get to. Just I was going through your bio there, and there's so many interesting topics that I want to sort of touch on. But let's go back to the beginning. And one of the things that I notice is that you are involved in many creative pursuits. You're an artist, you're a writer, you're a podcaster. So where and when did that interest in creative pursuits begin for you? And what was the first creative artistic pursuit that sort of caught your imagination?
Well, my parents are they're military, so we live in like little isolated bases all over the place, and there's not a lot going on there. But when and my parents weren't rich, so actually my parents were kind of poor. So we didn't have a TV, we didn't have anything, but there was a library, and I go to the library all the time. And I take out this huge stack of books, and I was a voracious reader, so I'd have it all read within like a week. And I'd read like graphic novels, I'd read full novel. Like I was reading an adult level by fourth grade. So I was like, not only did I was that my entertainment, and like we'd build tree forts, we play like soldier with fireworks in the woods. Like they're all abandoned army training grounds, so there already be foxholes there, the foundations of buildings from World War II. And so we did all that, but like your whole mind would be going like you're an alien astronaut, fighting, like creatures or whatever. And so I remember I always enjoyed making up these little fancy worlds, and I'd write about them. I wrote my first novel in fifth grade. I'm sure it's horrible if you read it now, but and I always drew. And like I remember my parents sent me to oil painting classes with like a neighbor who was an oil painter when I was in third grade. And I was just always a kid that drew. So that was my entertainment, reading and writing.
That's great, and like that's taken playing army to a whole new level when you've got actual like foxholes and shit to to actually play in. That's pretty awesome.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So when did you first realize that hey, I've got an aptitude, I've got a talent at this, and I could do something with it?
Well, I always thought like, all right, so I was when I turned to a teenager, like or evolved to a teenager or whatever. Like first I got into metal and then I got into punk rock. And when I get into anything, I get into anything over the top. So I had this giant mohawk and a spiky leather jacket and combat boots, and there are lots and lots of people, especially like we'd be in like in the South in small towns. They're like, "What is wrong with you?" And you just kind of develop a hard skin. You're like, this is me. This is what I want to do. So I think that kind of applies to everything. It's like, you should definitely be open to criticism when it comes to like our work or writing or whatever, but, don't get discouraged.
Right, for sure. I think I was as a teenager, in a metalhead with the long hair and the earrings as well. So I kind of, jive with what you're talking about there. So moving on from that, I'm going to get back into the art a little bit later. So a knife fight with a crackhead, that kind of jumped out at me, as I think it would with anybody. So can you talk a little bit about that crazy experience?
Yeah, it's so I was a teenage punk rocker. I moved in with my girlfriend in downtown DC, because somebody I used to I got into a club with a fake ID, but so did somebody else, and it's a long story, but they ended up flipping my car. So now my beater that I get around on, I can no longer get around on, and so I moved in with my girlfriend in the big city. Hopefully I get a job there, and so so I moved in with her, and DC was really bad in those years. This was like the Marion Barry, like college, smoking crack with the
Smoking crack,
hooker.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I remember even like the mediocre neighborhoods, the houses, or like, well, they weren't even houses, they were like apartment complexes, but they have gates around them. And the gates were just so you didn't get stabbed and robbed. And I remember I was living with my girlfriend, and her sister moved in from the suburbs, knew nothing about anything. and walked her fluffy red dog around the block at midnight.
Oh
So
no.
two crackheads came up to her. They were trying to rob her. She had no money. They made her let them in the building so she keyed them in. And when they got a hold of us, she was when she got a hold of us, like me and my girlfriend were upstairs, and we heard her hysterically calling to us and come downstairs. And one of the crackheads has her with a hammer to her head, like he's starting to bash in her brains and like
Wow.
demanding money. It's kind of a long story. It's like I ended up fighting with the crackhead, got the hammer away. First he thought, like I was like, she didn't have any money. He thought, well, I might. He's like, well, you do, and it's a long story, but it went back and forth between the hammer and the knife, and my girlfriend at the time came down the steps with the sawed-off heavy end of a pool cue. She's smashing him in the head as hard as she can, but he's so screwed up on crack that he's doing this, and then finally, he looks at her like, I'm going to kill you. And so then she runs upstairs and she calls the police, and the police say, if you don't come down, we're going to hang up.
Oh,
She's like, no, my boyfriend, blah, blah, blah. The police station was a block away. It took them 45 minutes to get there, and they called first to make sure that he wasn't in the building anymore.
wow. A lot can happen in 45 minutes.
Yeah, that's DC in that era,
Yeah, that sounds wild. And, I know that I don't know much about DC, but I know there's still parts of it that aren't great. But that sounds like it was like the Wild West back then.
Oh, I've been back to that area since then, and now there's like a Whole Foods there. And it's like it's way different.
Yeah, gentrification has
Yeah.
come to that neighborhood.
Yeah.
All right. So, also on your bio, it mentioned that you kind of had a little stint of illustrating political cartoons, which kind of seems a little bit out of place compared to the rest of your resume. How did that come about?
Well, I was in high school, like just out of high school actually, and I remember I was like the illustrator. I painted everyone's leather jackets. I did like the artwork for the bands and whatever. And I remember just for the fun of it, like the Republicans did the same. Like that's when the Republicans stormed Congress and they did this thing called Contract with America. So I did a political cartoon called Contract on America, and had the Statue of Liberty and like gun sights, and like I did everybody like I did like Newt Gingrich is like the mob boss, and I did Jesse Helms is like the Nazi Minister of Information, and I did Bill Clinton and Bob Dole. It's like stunt doubles, So I was just making fun of everybody, and I just thought it was funny. But I moved in with my girlfriend in DC, and somebody brought that to Mad Cat magazine. They go, "Oh, this is perfect." So then they got a hold of me and they wanted to print it, and they wanted me to do like a regular, a regular illustration for them. And I'm mostly libertarian, so like I'm not right wing or left wing. I just love to make fun of everybody,
Right.
and especially in those days when you're punk rock, you love to make fun of people.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember I got more hate mail than anybody else at the newspaper. But I also sold more copies because people love to buy it to see what offended them this week.
Right. So it just started out as something you were doing for fun, for your own entertainment, and presumably to show your friends and get a laugh, and it turned into actually something that was published.
Right, that's correct.
Right. So the libertarian thing is interesting to me, like especially in the climate that we're in now, where everything is so divided, right and left.
Right.
And I'm kind of along with you. Like they all deserve to be made fun of and ridiculed because they're all fucking things up, and it doesn't really matter who's in charge. So are your political leanings, I would assume, were always that way, always, about freedom and doing your own thing, and both sides are kind of messed up.
Well, pretty much, yeah. Like I remember in high school, like last year of high school, there was like abortion parade on the grounds of DC, and there were a bunch of protesters there, and I just went because there was a girl that I thought was really hot was going, so I was like, I'll go with you. But they had a protest table with all these glossy pictures of like dead babies and stuff. I was like, oh, these are awesome. How can I get some?
Yeah.
They didn't find it very amusing, but yeah, I do love pushing buttons, but like in general, what I've always believed is just like leave people the fuck alone. Let them do their thing. You do your thing. Like I don't care if you're gay, if you're transgender, if you're whatever. Whatever makes you happy makes you happy. Why does it infringe me what you do with your life?
Right. As long as you're not enforcing that on me, then
I don't care. Yeah, as long as you're not telling me what like you wouldn't like me telling you what to do. Don't tell me what to do.
Yeah.
So I've just pretty much always had that mentality. What it has evolved over time is like I mean I don't get into a whole big political rant, but like as far as like education thing, I remember thinking like, oh well, I can do this, and I remember so I had a high enough GPA to get into Harvard. That's what they told me. Wow. And I had a 4.0 grade point average. It was like 3.95 or whatever. But like, so it's not that I was a bad student, but I looked very punk rock. Mm-hmm. And I remember interviewing with the guidance counselor. I was trying to get my dad to, help me co-sign a loan so I could go to a school. And he's like, oh, well, art's not a career. Reading's not a career. If you want to study some, like physics or whatever, because I did really well in physics, but that's just because I enjoy it.
Right.
And so I didn't want to do that. So I went to the guidance counselor to see how I could get a loan or whatever. And I remember her exact words. She said, get ready for a career of pumping gas because that's all you ever do.
I think there's a lot of kids that were told that back in that era, which now would be like there'd be an uproar about that. So what do you think? You mentioned the punk rock and the metal. So do you think your outlook on life was influenced by the music, or was it the other way around? Did your outlook on life draw you to that music?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both because, punk rock encompasses a very wide area. You have people that are like, super, super leftist, anarchists, hate everybody. And then you have people that are like, they're basically conservatives. They're like, right-wing nutcases, and you can kind of like this appeals to me, this doesn't appeal to me. And even with like bands, like there's some bands that like a lot like the Dead Kennedys. Mm-hmm. I don't agree 100% with everything that Jello Biafra says, but I don't have to. Right. I mean, that's the great thing about this country. It's like, oh well, I like what you did there. I like what you did there. So I mean, over time, my beliefs have changed a little bit. Like that's what I was saying with the education thing. I think education is our future, and I think if you show an aptitude in something, then I think society should help you like go to school or whatever. And in the end, I think it's going to pay back society. But it's only if you show an aptitude. Like you can't just go, oh yeah, free everything. Here you go.
Right.
But
for sure.
That's I don't want to get on a political rant, but my point with that was saying, so I see some elements what some people say, some elements what other people say, and I try to put together my own perspective off that.
Absolutely, because the punk movement, as you well know, was basically a product of disaffected young people, right. That felt that they didn't have a future, that, there was nothing for them, and that sort of influenced the music. So,
as the Sex Pistols say, no future.
That's right, no future for you, for sure.
Yeah.
So you mentioned your family is from a military background. What was their opinion on, your look, your music, were they live and let live about it, or were they trying to steer you in a different direction?
I haven't seen them in 12 years, maybe more. Yeah, no, they were very, like we get along great. Like they're super religious, but aside from that, 'cause I've been an atheist since fourth grade.
Mhm.
So aside from that, we got along fine until I got like super in the middle and then into punk rock, and then they flipped out.
Mhm.
My brother spent all of his between ninth and 10th grade. He spent the entire summer in a mental institute. You know, basically like, oh, you're punk rock, you must be inspired by Satan. Okay, you're going to a mental institute.
Sounds like a suicidal tendency song,
Yeah, oh
doesn't
yeah, yeah. All he wanted was a Pepsi, and
it?
they wouldn't give it
Just
to
one Pepsi,
him.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's move forward a little bit. Now you've discovered your love for various art forms, for music. Where does the tattooing come in to the picture?
When I was 19 and I was still in Virginia, a good friend of mine named Sonia, she was dating a guy who was a tattoo artist from Virginia Beach, and he saw my stuff. He was like, "That guy should learn a tattoo. I'll teach him." And at the time, I thought that tattoos were like Mike Ness, like little, like traditional pieces. I was like, "Well, that's very nice of you, but thanks. That's not what I want to do with my art." And then years later, like I did the political cartoons, and I was really trying to get into the comic book industry, like into like DC Comics and Marvel Comics. And I went to art school, and which you paid for on my own dime, by the way. I had a motorcycle, and you know how hard it is to get around, with art supplies on motorcycle handlebars.
I
Uh,
don't know, but I can imagine.
but I moved to New York City to like try and make it as an artist. Basically with a backpack on my like 10-year-old motorcycle. That was it. And I just moved to New York City. And so I was in New York City, and like you have all these big dreams when you're like in your early 20s about like, yeah, everyone's gonna see how great I am. They'll hire me immediately and throw money at me. That does not happen.
Mm.
So I ended up I worked at a shitty restaurant job. I worked at the Hard Rock Cafe, which by the way sucks. But I worked there, and I was like, I really hated this job. And a friend of my brother's was a tattoo artist, and he saw my paintings. He's like, that guy should start tattooing. And by that point, I seen like more advanced tattoos, like Guy Aitchison's work and Robert Hernandez's work. And they're both huge legends. And I was like, hey, you can do some cool stuff with this. So I started doing it until I got a quote real job, and then I just liked it so much I've stuck with it ever since. Like now I own a job.
That's amazing. So when it comes to the art of being a tattoo artist, in what ways is that different? Like obviously you're working on skin on a human being, so there's obviously that difference. But are there other differences in the art from painting or sketching, or is it just I guess basically you're more doing what people want you to do in terms of like, oh, I want this on my skin, but in the learning process itself, are there similarities between all those different types of art?
Well, there are similarities and there are differences. And I'm glad you asked, because that's a very important distinction a lot of people don't know. Like I learned the hard way, like how different they are. Because I went to art school and it's very polished portfolio, and I start tattooing, and I'm like, punk rock in my young 20s and very, very like, cocky, like this is the way it is. And, if you're saying something different, you're a hater. Well, some of that is actually true. So there's a lot of stuff with tattooing that wouldn't apply to, illustration on a piece of paper. Like it needs to be angled on the skin a certain way. Different skin types react ink differently, different areas of the body react ink. Tattoos spread over time, so you have to keep longevity in mind. Um,
Hmm.
like tattoos flow they look much better if they flow well with the body. So you need to like craft it so it flows well with the body. I remember one of the early sleeves I did was based off Resident Evil, and I did a whole thing with like skyscrapers coming up the arm with like zombies and everything. I thought it looked great at the time, but the problem is like you don't always keep your arm like this. Sometimes your arm like this, sometimes like this. So that distorts the picture the minute you move your arm.
Right.
it's only good when you have your arm out straight, and preferably you would have something that looks great with you, whatever you're doing. You know,
Right.
but these are all things you learn. Like at this point, I've been tattooing 24 years,
Mm.
and I feel like you learn something new all the time. The minute you show yourself off and you say I know everything, you may as well quit.
That's the way it is with everything, right? Like you can
Yeah,
be. There's reasons that professional athletes still practice
yeah.
because they're still learning new things as well. So like it seems to me, and from what you said, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that when you're tattooing, you have to take the person's body shape into account. Like there's so much more that you have to take into account than someone like me who knows nothing about it would even think about.
Well, there's a lot you have to take into account, and the problem is, one, a lot of people have seen these reality shows, which, by the way, they're like air quotes reality. They're not reality at all.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've been invited to some, and I've seen some filmed, and they are the furthest thing from reality that. But that aside, there's a lot that you have to take into perspective, and there's a lot that they like. I'll just give you one quick one. They did that cover-up show, and they do these amazing cover-ups, and you're like, wow, I did not know you could do that as a cover-up. Well, actually, some of that you really can. 'Cause they'll do the cover-up, and it looks great for the photo. But what happens is, like, the ink is deposited in the second layer of skin, but that top layer is saturated, it peels off and grows back clear, so whatever's in that second layer pops back through.
Uh-huh.
So when you do like white over black in the cover up, maybe that top layer is all saturated, so it looks like you covered up. Yeah, give it a week. Give it a
Mm.
week when that top layer replaces itself, and then the original pops back up. So you watch those cover up shows, you're like, wow, that cover up is really pop. No, it's not. You know, or like the Miami Ink where they'll walk in, they're like, I want a back piece. They're like, oh, wow, what do you want? Okay, I'll draw it on the spot. You sit down and we'll start it. That does not happen.
So the first time you tattooed an actual person, because if it were, I'm thinking about it from my perspective that, I don't have any tattoos. I've never done a tattoo. I would be thinking like if I fuck this up, like this is permanent. Like it does when you're starting out, does that enter into your head or are you confident enough that you're like, no, it's all good?
It does, but most people kind of start out on this like staggered path. Like, so the first person I ever tattooed was my girlfriend at the time. That's not why she's not my girlfriend now, but it was not that great. But it's like, yeah, I'm gonna try this, and then you're not charging them. If I was charging them, that would be like a further burden on you. Another one is like, she's complaining. She's like, oh, it hurts. And you're going, well, is this normal or is this because I, fresh at tattooing? So there's a lot going into it. But I think when you first charge somebody for something, there definitely is like a little bit of intimidation or fear in the back of your head. I
Hmm.
mean, I kind of have the mindset of anything I want to do, I'm going to try and do it.
Right.
I mean, that's how I got, into punk rock and everything else. That's how I got away. Like, I remember my dad chasing me around the house with scissors because my hair was too long, you know. So, a certain amount of impetus is needed, but I think you should have like kind of a little bit like perspective of what all's going on, and yeah, that all feeds into it.
Now, so my professional background is IT. So we know that technology is changing at just a ridiculous pace and always have to keep on top of the technology and what's coming down the pipeline. Is it the same in tattooing with equipment, inks?
Oh yeah, definitely, yeah. The When I started tattooing, like I started in '98, and I think I was like one of the first guys to do color portraits. And I was like, well, I paint in color. Why wouldn't I do a portrait in color? Well, there's actually a reason. Like different colors fade at different rates, and when you do something super realistic, you like meld all these different colors together. It looks great, until one phased out before the other one, and then the whole thing falls apart. You know, so yeah, there is plenty that you learn over time. You know, but people have all they've kind of learned what works, what doesn't work. Like the like I remember when I started out, everybody used what were called co-op machines, which are those really loud like machines. Now a lot of them, like me included, use what's called a rotary machine, which is like they're pretty much silent. And it used to be that all machines like had that standard, like L look to them.
Mm-hmm.
Now they look like pens, so you just draw on people.
Hmm.
It used to be that I remember I started right in the days when people were still making their own needles. And it was called a needle jig, and we'd get like packets of loose needles, and we'd solder them all together, and then we'd autoclave them. Nobody does that anymore. Like now they just buy them, but it used to be that it was like $3.50 a needle, and you weren't even sure if it was good. And
Mm-hmm.
and, and now when you buy a needle, it's like 30 cents or less.
Right. So I'd be interested to get your take on this. Back in the day, if you had tattoos, it was a sign of rebellion or individuality or what have you. Nowadays, it's almost the opposite. Like if you don't have them, it's kind of an anomaly in a way. Like myself, for example, which is obviously great for tattoo artists like you that everybody has tattoos. What is your opinion on the progression of tattoos from rebellion to kind of, let's call it mainstream? Obviously, it's good for your business. What do you think of it as a trend?
Well, it's it's kind of a mixed bag as far as whether it's good for my business because there's so many artists out there
That's a
now,
good point.
and a lot of them are very talented. So you constantly have to like step up your game. You have to like advertise yourself. It used to be like you're kind of like the big fish in the small pond. It's like if you wanted to get tattooed, there were only so many shops,
Hmm.
and the people that were really good, they were pretty rare. There was like maybe one per city. Now there's like one per neighborhood, like one per town. You
Hmm.
know, they make a. It's funny, like going with your whole thing about like what's the usual now is they have a meme that they make with this like it used to be like if you had a neck tattoo it said I'm badass, stay away from me, motherfucker. Now it says let me read you my vegan poetry.
Yeah, that's about right. That's funny. All right,
But
so go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, it's a mixed bag. Like, I remember when I started, there were a lot of people that could do. We call them flash, like those, like simple designs on the wall that you pick out, and they have a price on
Yeah,
them.
and a book through a book,
Yeah,
a binder kind of thing. Yeah.
yeah. But those people would make crazy money. Like, I mean, we're talking like in like '95, they make like 8 grand a week. You know, off
Hmm.
just doing that stuff. And then like maybe it's partially my fault, but I came in. I like when I first started out, I had this like slick art portfolio with like paintings and drawing and stuff. So I was like, I don't have a lot of tattoos. So I wanted to convince people I can draw. But people, doing that sort of stuff, like a lot of the old timers, are like, oh, well, you think you can draw? It's like, well, actually, I do. And they're like, oh, well, that didn't look like that. But it's pretty much taken over now. So I mean, now you have genres like the old school tattoo is a specific genre called traditional tattooing.
Right. Let's get on to another art form that you practice. You've also written multiple books. Talk about that. Let's say you mentioned that you had written a book in the fifth grade or the fourth grade or whatever it was. When was your first, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, serious book that you wrote, published, and what was the topic of that?
I don't take it as disrespectful. Yeah, my first quote serious book, I guess, would be it was called The Black Seas of Infinity, and it came out in 2011. I actually recently just got the rights back from the publisher, and I like revised it and edited and added illustrations and re-released it. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Hmm.
But I started writing, and then I got busy tattooing. It was the early days of me tattooing. I only been tattooing for like a year and a half, and I came down with brain cancer, and then I did deal with that. And I just got married. Like my girlfriend, stuck with me, was really faithful during brain cancer. So I'm like, that's a good person. So I
Hmm.
married her. And then I had to go through chemotherapy and recovery and all that. So while I was doing all this, I like blew up in the tattoo world. Like, I've been in hundreds of books and magazines. I was invited all over the world. So I just got distracted. So I always wanted to be a writer and artist. That's what I wanted to do ever since I was a little kid. But I was like, I do a little bit here, I do a little bit there. And then there was a writer from Ireland, and he wrote a zombie novel, and one of the main characters was a tattoo artist. So he wanted to get a hold of me. And like that's when I was in all the magazines. So it was like, oh, this guy, I should ask him. And he asked me, can you read it and tell me the portrayal? And I read it was a pretty bad portrayal. But he listened to me, and he changed it. And I said, by the way, I'm writing something. So then I cranked out something real fast. Like, well, I had about half of it that I've been picking away at. I cranked out the rest real fast and handed it over to the publisher, and it got rejected. It was crap. I'll really admit that. But then I took my time and I polished out the rest of it and I resubmitted it, and then it got published, and then I just kept going ever since. And I really enjoy that. Like, people ask me all the time, would you just tattoo or just draw or just write if you only had one option? And I say, I refuse to accept that question.
Hmm.
you
Yeah.
know, I enjoy a little bit of all of them.
Right. You you and I are similar in some ways, but different in one major way. So I got, obviously podcasting. I've self-published a couple of books of poetry. So I dabble in different things as well. The difference is I don't know if I have a little ADHD or something that's undiagnosed, but I'll do something for a while and then I'll leave it. And like the first sort of version of this podcast was back in 2016. And I'm kicking myself thinking, if you had just stuck with it, because I was
You mean
starting,
Joe Rogan by now?
I wouldn't go quite that far, man, but who knows? I could be making a living off it. Who knows where it would have gone? It could have gone nowhere. But these are the things that sort of I run through my head, like you fucking idiot. Like, why didn't you keep going? Whereas with you, like you said, when you go into something, you go all in. And I admire that about people like yourself that you can do that. Where I'm just okay, I've done that. Maybe I'll try this now. Has that always been your personality? Like even from a little kid that once you get into something, you get into it hard.
Oh, yeah. I got so. This sounds like a sidetrack, but it's not. So when I was a teenager and I was a punk rocker, it was in the South. I got beat up especially like Nazi skins. Nazi skins were a big thing in Northern Virginia. So like I had my nose broken 3 times. So finally, like the last straw was when I got knifed by that crackhead. I was like, I've got to learn how to defend myself. So then first I got into Taekwondo. Like I was thinking, like, oh, I'm a big Bruce Lee fan, and I don't know, Taekwondo just was the thing that appealed to me. So when they got into it, I was like buying books. I was like, sparring with people that worked at hotels and the conference center. I was going to all the conventions. I'm actually a secondary black belt Taekwondo, and I won a gold medal at the World Championships in or the state championships in Virginia. And I was like, when I get into something, I get super into it. I was like, then I was smoking and drinking and doing drugs. I became straight edge for like 8 years. I was straight edge just to make me better at Taekwondo. So I was pressing on. I started working out. I'd never worked out before. I thought that was a total jock thing, but I was like, yeah, I'll start working out. So then I started, and I started working out just to make me better at Taekwondo. So yeah, it's a long story short. I took a very deep dive into it, but I didn't do that with a lot of stuff.
Is there a correlation between the discipline you need to be great at a martial art like that, and that trickles over into your tattooing, your other art? Has that kind of discipline helped you be more disciplined in other facets of your life as well?
I think so. One thing I've noticed, I mean, it's the whole like, don't give up thing. It's like you have lots of people say, well, I don't know if you thought about this, like, don't let that discourage you. Look at them as like speed bumps, not blockades.
Hmm.
So whenever anything bad happens in my life, I just try and look at it as a speed bump. I'm like, I'm here, I want to be here, and whatever's in the way, I'll just find out some way to go around it.
That's a great outlook to have. And that's a good segue as well, because I wanted to loop back. You mentioned your battle with brain cancer, and I also know that you've had other tragedies in your life, and I wanted to sort of touch on them a little bit. So, how old were you when you had the brain cancer diagnosis? And when those words are said to you, what goes through your head? And is it like, okay, I'm going to kick this thing in the ass, or is there like the thought of, oh my god, am I going to die, or is it a little bit of all of that?
Well, I was in Bellevue Hospital having surgery in ICU when the Twin Towers went down. So, like, I was in bed in ICU, and you don't really sleep in ICU. It's like 30 minutes here, 30 minutes there. And I
Hmm.
remember we heard over the radio, oh my God, a plane just crashed into the tower. And they all thought it was like an accident when the first one hit. And then
Hmm.
the second one hits, and they're like, oh, it was terrorism. And I remember the English speaking TVs were not working. So the Spanish speaking TVs, we see the images on, and the radio would tell us kind of what's going on because I don't speak fluent Spanish. um, but I remember that's when it happened, and that was uh, that it was pretty that was pretty surreal.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, is your mindset in that regard, because people deal with that kind of thing differently? Some people kind of give up and they accept their fate when it's not necessarily their fate, and some people just get on with the fight to overcome that. Were you immediately like, okay, this is the hand I've been dealt, this is what I've got to do?
That's pretty much what I did. Like I feel like my whole life is like whatever I want to do, I had to fight for it. I wanted to be in the middle. I wanted to be in punk rock. I wanted to I wanted to read horror. I wanted to, and like there was always like that little negative voice speaking on the side, and you just got to go. You know what? This whether you're right or wrong, you go. This is what I'm into. I'm going to try and go for this. You
Hmm.
know, and I remember when the whole brain cancer thing came up. Like I was living in New York. I finally started to make some consistent money as a tattoo artist. I was starting to make my way in the community. Like I slowly gotten better and better shops and so on. And then I came down with brain cancer. So I kind of looked at it. This I'm not going to let this stop me. This is a speed bump. Like I made it all the way to New York. I'm a tattoo artist now. I'm not going to let it in here. What, this is going to be the end of me? No. So I remember and I was also at that point I like seen the UFC, so I was like I need to learn more than Taekwondo. So at the time I was big into Jeet Kune Do, which is
Hmm.
Bruce Lee's martial art, and I remember at first I was getting headaches, and then I went to a clinic, and I went to a cheap clinic because it's all I could afford, and they said, oh, well, it's probably because you got kicked in the head or punched in the head. Just take this migraine medicine. Oh, but we're out. Just go to the pharmacy. I went to the pharmacy. They can read a script. And they said, you have to go to a better clinic. So I went to a clinic that cost like 3 times as much. And they're like, oh, well, you're just dehydrated. And they pumped me full of saline solution. They're like, just call us tomorrow if it's worse. And the next day it was way worse. Like, my girl was taking me to the hospital, and I was walking sideways. I was trying to walk straight, but I was walking sideways. And my head felt like I had a jackhammer to the back. Like I felt like putting a gum in my mouth and like leaning over the sink and just blowing my brains out just to make it stop.
Hmm.
And I remember when they finally said, and they go, "Oh, what do you do?" Oh, well, it's a brain bleed. They put me in a CAT scan. They go, "Oh, wait, it's cancer." I was like, "Oh, well." To me, I was like, "You finally know what it is. You can finally address it." I
Yeah.
remember my girl started crying. She's like, "You don't care?" I'm like, "Well, of course I care. What am I gonna do?" You
Hmm.
know,
I'm not sure if you're at all familiar with the Stoic philosophy, but basically it comes down to what you just said is that, instead of, you know, thinking about what is out of your control and worrying about it and being anxious about it, that you just digest it, and then it's how you react to it that's important.
right.
And it sounds like that's what you did in that case. Your attitude was, okay, this is what it is. At least I know what the hell it is now, for one. And now we can deal with it, which I think goes a long way into helping people overcome that kind of and any kind of obstacle.
Well, I will say, I think people think that, like, if you're like that, you don't take anything into consideration. Well, of course you do. You just don't let it like rule you. You
Mm-hmm.
know. So, like, did I go? Yeah, man, this sucks, or yeah, man, this could end very badly, or like they told me I had a 50-50 chance of making it. So, yeah, I could die, but it's like you don't go, yeah, well, that's too much, that's too heavy for me. You just go, all right, well, those are the dice in the field. That's what I got to play with. I got to keep going.
And another obviously huge tragedy that affected your life that you've also obviously overcome is the loss of your wife in a hit and run accident. Would you share a little bit about
Yeah,
that? And
I would just say it wasn't an accident. It was like probably it was like some drunk guy just plowed and never kept going. Um, but
yeah, accident
yeah,
is the wrong word in that case. Yeah, yeah.
but that was a big event. Like to my remembrance, I've only cried twice in my life, and when she died in the hospital, that was when I cried. Um, and the thing is, like the it was just a shit show. Like it happened, the NYPD tried to blow it off. Apparently, it's like much easier if you say a motorcyclist did something wrong. She was on a motorcycle going to music school,
Mm,
So and she was a Colombian immigrant, and she was very pretty, but she was also covered in tattoos. So
mm-hmm,
they're like, I'm sure they're like, oh, it's an immigrant covered in tattoos. We'll just brush her under the rug. So then we hired an attorney and we got some great advice. He said, picture her as a model. And like she did some alternative modeling. So we pitched her as a model. All of a sudden it was in all the papers, you know. Like my brother-in-law was on Telemundo and Univision. I was on New York 5, New York 1. And I was just talking about how like they were fucking everything up.
mm-hmm.
And that's when it kind of got the ball rolling. But again, it's one of those things where like instead of me going, "Oh my god, this is so heavy," it just let it cripple me. I was like, "What can I do to make this as good as possible?" Like first, I thought that she was going to live because the hospital is such a shit show. It was a hospital in the Marcy Projects, which is where Jay Z is from and stuff. Like that was the closest one, so that's where they took her.
Mm-hmm.
So apparently, when she got hit, it snapped her neck when she landed, and there was no oxygen to the brain for a half hour, which means you're brain dead.
Yeah.
But the EMS didn't tell the hospital that, so they revived her. So
Mm-hmm.
but you don't become conscious. You're just your body's alive on machines.
Mm-hmm.
So like I remember for a day and a half, I'm like, waiting like a signal go a little bit up. I'm like, oh, she's gonna make it. She's getting better. And then you finally realize that she's not gonna make it. You know,
Mm-hmm.
but it's like the first my whole thing was like, what can I do? What can I do? And like I had a friend post signs everywhere. We're looking for the driver. I was like getting a hold of like all the tattoo artists. Like the tattoo artists in the motorcycle community were really great. Like they,
Mm-hmm.
they all stepped in. But I was trying to get a hold of everybody to like make it a big deal because my mindset was like, you know, what can I do about this? I'm going to do everything I possibly can. And then when it turned out that she was not going to make it, then I was like, I need to let everybody know about this. And,
Hmm.
we hired a private investigator. We did a GoFundMe to raise funds for a reward and, all that.
And was the person ever caught?
No.
No. Does that weigh on you at all, or have you just accepted that? And
It's a planet of 7 billion people. I'm sure it was like some drunk fucking loser, and everybody's like, "Oh, Connor's a bitch," something's gonna happen to him. I'm like, well, I hope something does. I only wish the worst on him. But
hmm
you know, I don't have any hope. I mean, horrible people live all the time and good people die. So,
yeah, that's the
the
way it
most you can
goes.
do, the most you can do is like handle stuff in your own sphere as much as possible.
Yeah, well, you mentioned 9/11, and which the anniversary obviously just passed, and what you just said pretty much speaks about every one of those people. They just went to work one day, and you just don't know what's coming around the corner, right?
Right.
So
Well,
let's move.
I remember real quick, just when I got out of the hospital, and I was trying to get a cab home, I could not even hail a cab. Like cabs were flying up the street, the skies were all smoky, the little piece of paper coming down. People were walking down the street crying, leaning on each other. It was like a zombie surreal world.
Absolutely. I remember I was riveted to the TV for days, just blown away by what had happened, and couldn't take my eyes off it. So let's move to the present now, and obviously all those things that have happened, and the things from your youth, being beaten up for how you looked, and everything that's happened to you has sort of formed you as a person, and I'm sure it's formed you as an artist as well. Um, how has your outlook at all changed as you've gotten older? Because I know when I was younger, I leaned more, to the liberal side of things, and then as I started getting older, I got more conservative. Now I'm sort of in the middle, kind of like, just as long as you're not messing with my life, you do what you want, kind of thing. Um, have as you've gotten older, have things changed in regards to your outlook, how you approach your art, anything like that?
I think, well, my artwork and my writing, all that stuff, has evolved over time. I think it's been kind of a natural progression. Like I try and keep the same themes and the same interests and the same agenda. I wouldn't even say agenda because I don't really have an agenda per se other than expressing myself. But I feel like I refine it. As far as my politics, like I remember in high school, like I wasn't like hugely political, but it's been like, yeah, the Republicans suck because they're trying to ban music and they're trying to ban speech and they're trying to ban books. And then I remember I read when I was 19, I read Atlas Shrugged, and
Mm,
that totally changed my world. And then I became very, very like libertarian, but like libertarian, like so libertarian that like they don't like any social programs whatsoever. And then like is more objectivist than libertarian. And
hmm
then as time went by, I go, well, I think we need some social programs. So like what I brought up to you with like the education thing, I think um, a better educated society is great for all of us. I mean, don't get like a education in like dance theory or something,
right, right.
but we'd love to have people that are like better architects, better whatever. So I think like if you showed an aptitude in high school, like you're into it,
hmm
maybe trade school or college, I think that should be provided for you. I also believe that like if you have some sort of catastrophic thing like brain cancer or heart disease or something like that, I think we as a society can afford to pay for that. I think it's a very small percentage of people that have that. But I don't think that I still have that libertarian outlook of like, yeah, don't pay the way for everything for everybody all the
Hmm.
time. You know,
Right.
that's like, you might have good intentions there, but that's not the way the human mind works.
Right.
I think you need some incentive, like, like people are like, oh, well, you should pay for all basic medical services. Like, no, how about you just don't fucking eat tons of pieces, smoke tons of cigarettes, and then you won't need as many.
Hmm.
Or
Exactly.
if you do, you got to pay for it. Why should I have to pay for you smoking cigarettes?
Right. It's like the idea of universal basic income. Like, oh, let's just give people $2,000 a month
Yeah,
for.
where's it going to come from?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Where's it going to come from? And what incentive does that person have to try to better themselves?
that's true.
Because if you're out there, you need to make a living, you got to put food on your own table. It's a pretty good incentive
Well, they tried that in Canada for a while, and it was a disaster, and they pulled it
yeah.
back.
Yeah, I'm from Canada, so I know everything that's going on here, and now it's my turn to not go on a political rant, so I'm just going to leave that alone. So you also you also do a podcast. Talk a little bit about the podcast. When did you
Yeah,
start it? What's it about?
it's called Soul Session. It started about a year ago. I was just like, hey, I know a lot of artists and a lot of writers and some musicians. Like I went for a couple of years where I did like a bunch of album covers for like metalcore bands and
Hmm.
hardcore bands, metal bands. So I was like, why don't I just interview all these people? And, you know, everything is a learning process. So, I went from a half hour to like all the way out to like an hour and a half. And then I started dialing it back. Now I try and stay about like 40 minutes and kind of get the meat and potatoes of the story down.
Hmm.
But yeah, I try to interview, I think, interesting people, see what's going on in their life. And I always like, I'm a very visual person. So I like to, I put a lot of images in the podcast. Like
Hmm.
if you talk about a movie, then boom, it'll pop up on the screen.
Nice.
So I just try like, I try and think what would entertain me. Okay,
Right.
what questions would I have?
Right. That's kind of exactly what I do. I just like to talk to people that are doing things that interest me, or about topics that interest me. And I don't script any. I don't plan any questions. They just kind of, one thing follows the other, which I really enjoy because it's just more like a conversation that way, right? It's just like we're
Oh
sitting
yeah, definitely. Yeah.
having a drink and talking. So is it a weekly podcast? How often do you? Is it just whenever you get
No,
around to put one?
it's once a week. Like originally, at Video Guy, he moved on to like a bigger paying project. I don't blame him at all. But I was like, I try and do it consistently every
Mhm.
single week, every Thursday. And like I'll edit it all and put it all together Wednesday night, so it debuts like at 12:01. On Thursday, but every Thursday I try and put it out.
That's awesome. And any writing projects in the works or in the planning stages?
Yeah, well, I just rewrote The Black Season Infinity, which is my debut novel. And the thing is, that's a story that I had for years. And I first I was doing it as a comic book, as a graphic novel, then illustrated, and finally I put it out. And then all these years passed. I put it out in 2011. So all these years passed. I've done tons of seminars, met tons of writers. I think my writing's evolved a lot. So it's like, I really like that story. Why don't I go back and polish it up? And so I did all that. So it was actually less words, although more illustrations and whatever. I'm very proud of it. So definitely everyone check that out. Black Season Infinity. But I also did because I do illustrations for a bunch of authors that are like in magazines and anthologies. I said, I will give you an original drawing if you do a short story for this anthology I'm doing. So I put an anthology called The Never Dead. And for every story, I do a little illustration, and I give that illustration to the authors, and they loved it. They're all very nice about it. And it's like a mix of like some people that are well known, like Jeff Strand, to people that are like basically unknowns. But I like their story. Like there were some people that I turned away.
Right.
I didn't say, "Oh, this crap." I just go, "Oh yeah, man, it's not really the theme we're going for."
Yeah.
But
Being diplomatic.
yeah, exactly. well, I mean, you never know. I mean, that could have been like their early bad stuff. Maybe they came out with something better. Maybe they had one off. There's no reason to be a dick.
That's right. Yeah.
But so those are the two I have out right now. And then what's his name? Merrill David. He puts on the Houston Horror Convention. It's like the Houston Author Horror Convention, and he's putting out it's like a collection of short stories, and he asked me to write a short story for it. So I'm going to write a short story for it. I wish I recalled the name. I don't, but it's not going to be out until I think July.
So just to wrap this up, is there anything you want to plug? Your website, socials, and anything?
My website is pretty much like my go-to for everything. It has my blog on it. It has a link to my podcast. It has all my artwork. It has my tattoos. It has all my writing. Everything's on there. Is danhenk.com. It's DNHENK. A lot of people get that wrong. They think
they put an A.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I have some weird German last name that was it's a very common German first name. And probably when my grandparents came to Ellis Island, they were like, all right, this is your name.
Yeah. Yeah. It may have been a lot longer at the time.
Oh, yeah. It might have been, yeah.
Yeah.
They
That's
came
awesome.
here right before the war. So we probably had a ton of people coming with them. They're just like, all right.
Yeah, this is who you are now.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I encourage everyone to check that out. And if I ever do decide to get a tattoo, I'm going to hit you up and head down to New York. Yeah, first one right there, right?
Yeah.
Well, Dan, I really appreciate you talking to me today. I really enjoyed our conversation. A lot of fun topics and some more serious ones. But thanks for doing it.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, man.